Hey friends, this is Stephen Suttles, and welcome to the Alpha and Omega from the Flood to the Future podcast. Our goal is to bridge the gap between ancient biblical foundations and the modern digital landscape by anchoring ourselves in the literal history of Genesis and examining modern technology like AI and biometric infrastructure, all through a theological lens. We want to equip you with the clarity needed to navigate this rapid tech era. It's time to move faith out of retreat and into active engagement. If you haven't already, I'd love for you to connect with us online. On Facebook, just search for Alpha and Omega and follow us to get the latest updates. And then on YouTube, search for Alpha and Omega from the Flood to the Future and subscribe there. In addition, my newly released books are available and can be used as a Sunday school, small group, or educational class curriculum. You can search for those on Amazon. What is a Christian to believe about creation and the flood? An Apologia of Genesis 1 through 11. Also, Bite-Sized Prophecy, spelled B-Y-T-E, Bite-Sized Prophecy. And I greatly appreciate your support. Now let's get into this week's podcast.
Imagine for a second discovering that the Great Pyramid wasn't actually built by thousands of exhausted laborers just, hauling stones up wooden ramps.
Right.
But instead, it was built by this handful of 800-year-old geniuses using actual industrial machinery.
It's a wild thought.
It really is. Or, imagine that the evolutionary timeline we all learned in school, the one starting with single-celled organisms and ending with us standing upright, holding our smartphone.
It's a stat-book version, yeah.
Exactly. What if that timeline is actually running in completely the wrong direction?
Well, that is exactly the premise of what we are looking at today.
Yeah, today we are opening up a document. It's titled Creation 9 Genius of Ancient Man Days of Noah. And honestly, its central premise is designed to give you absolute whiplash.
It really is a complete paradigm shift from the mainstream narrative.
Totally.
Yeah.
The author is arguing that instead of humanity evolving over millions of years, ancient man was vastly physically and intellectually superior to us. We aren't evolving, we are literally devolving.
Yeah, but before we dive into the actual mechanics of how this author constructs that argument, and it's a very detailed argument, we do need to set some parameters for this deep dive.
Oh, absolutely. The ground rules.
Right. So for you, the listener, the source material we're examining today is anchored in a highly specific biblical creationist worldview. And it contains some very charged religious, political, and, social viewpoints.
Very charged.
Yeah. So our goal today is absolutely not to endorse these viewpoints. I want to be super clear about that. We aren't here to debate them. And we're steering completely clear of taking any political sides.
We're just the messengers here.
Exactly. Our mission is just to impartially map out the architecture of this author's arguments.
Mm-hmm.
We want to understand how this worldview functions from the inside out so you can see where these ideas come from.
Okay, let's unpack this because, if you're going to claim that ancient humans were essentially super geniuses, you have to explain how that's even biologically possible.
You definitely need a mechanism for that.
Right. And the text points to this foundational, frankly, shocking claim, which is human longevity. The author asserts that ancient humans lived for an incredibly, incredibly long time.
And we're not talking about, eating a Mediterranean diet and making it to 105.
No, we are talking about lifespans of 500 to 800 years.
Which is just staggering to wrap your head around.
It is. Honestly, I can barely figure out my retirement plan for a normal lifespan. Imagine having a 700-year midlife crisis.
That would be a very long crisis. Yeah. But, the text actually offers a physiological and environmental mechanism to explain how a body could even sustain itself for that long.
Okay, so how does it say that works?
The author relies on something called the water vapor theory.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's referred to as the canopy theory.
It's canopy theory, okay.
Yeah, so this posits that before the global flood that's described in Genesis, the Earth's atmosphere was completely different than it is today.
Different how?
Well, supposedly there was this protective literal canopy of water vapor just enclosing the entire planet.
So a massive layer of water just suspended up in the upper atmosphere.
Exactly.
But how does the text say a water canopy translates to someone living for 8 centuries?
According to this theory, the canopy acted like a global hyperbaric chamber.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it would have significantly increased atmospheric pressure and created this hyper-oxygenated environment.
So they were basically breathing pure pressurized oxygen.
Right. And furthermore, this vapor layer supposedly filtered out the harmful cosmic and UV radiation that, constantly bombards our cells today.
The stuff that causes aging and disease.
Exactly. So you combine that pressurized, oxygen-rich, radiation-shielded environment with a perfectly pure food supply.
Right, because the text points out the complete absence of modern pollutants back then, like no fast food, no microplastics.
Right, none of that. And the author believes you have the biological recipe for near immortality.
That drastically shifts how we have to think about the compounding of human knowledge.
It really does. The implications for science are huge.
I mean, think about it. If you're a brilliant scientist today, you get, what, maybe 40 or 50 good years of research before your brain slows down or your career is over?
If you're lucky, yeah.
But imagine an all-star team of the greatest scientific minds in human history. Like, imagine Albert Einstein, Isaac Newton, and Johannes Kepler.
Okay.
If those three men, instead of working for a few decades and passing away, lived at exactly the same time and collaborated and ran experiments together for 800 years.
The technological advancement would be terrifyingly fast.
Exactly. The compounding interest on that kind of intellectual capital would just be exponential.
And what's fascinating here is that the text argues we constantly underestimate ancient humanity precisely because we apply our fragile, modern 70-year lifespans to them.
We assume they were just like us, but with less time.
Right. But if they had centuries to study, and if they were passing down knowledge directly from generations that overlapped for hundreds of years, their scientific output would eclipse ours very quickly.
Which makes sense logically, if you accept the premise.
Yeah, and the author uses this immense longevity to explain the ancient architectural marvels that we still can't quite figure out today. We look at the pyramids and assume brute force and slave labor.
Thousands of guys with ropes.
Exactly. But the author suggests we're actually looking at the output of long-lived intellects.
Hold on, though. I have a pushback here.
Let's hear it.
Even if I'm breathing pure oxygen inside a perfect radiation-free greenhouse, my cells still have a biological clock. I mean, good air and organic food don't rewrite human DNA. Eventually, things just break down.
That's the big question.
So how does the author get past the basic biological reality of cellular decay? Biologically, how does a body survive 900 years?
Well, that brings us to the author's argument about genetics, which is really the core of this whole devolution concept.
Sure.
According to the text, the ancient human body was fundamentally different on a molecular level.
Differ how?
To understand this, the author asks us to visualize human DNA. So imagine a single DNA double helix, the twisted ladder shape.
Sure, the classic biology textbook picture.
Right. Imagine scaling that up so it's the size of a regular physical ladder.
Okay, I'm picturing a ladder.
If you did that, it would stretch all the way from where you are right now to Chicago.
Wait, really? Just one strand?
Yeah. It is incredibly complex. And in human reproduction, half of that massive ladder comes from the father, half from the mother. It splits down the middle and zips back together in a specific sequence across 46 chromosomes.
That's a lot of data to copy it perfectly every time.
It is an incredibly delicate process.
And so the text argues that Adam and Eve, being the first humans created directly by God, possessed a quote-unquote perfect version of this ladder.
Exactly. According to the document, there were 0 errors, 0 missing rungs on that massive stretch of DNA.
But obviously, we don't have perfect DNA today.
No, we don't. As millennia have passed, humanity has acquired what the author calls a genetic load.
A genetic load? What does that mean exactly?
Think of it like saving a JPEG image on your computer.
Oh, I like this analogy.
Yeah, the very first time you create and save that image, it is crisp, it's perfect, all the data is there.
Right.
But if you copy and save that exact same image 10,000 times, what happens?
You start to get digital artifacts, the pixels blur, the colors shift.
Exactly. The data gets corrupted. The author is arguing that Adam and Eve were the raw, uncompressed file.
And we are the 10,000th JPEG.
We are. The text claims we currently carry a genetic load of about 4,000 defective genes. These are the mutations that degrade that original, perfect code.
This actually explains a really interesting tension in the biblical narrative that skeptics always bring up.
Which one?
Ancient intermarriage. Like, if the earliest humans intermarried to populate the Earth, why didn't they suffer from the severe genetic disorders we see today when close relatives marry?
Oh, right. The text actually has a specific answer for that.
Yeah, the author uses this dog breeding analogy that I found really helpful.
Let's hear it.
So if you've ever owned a highly pedigreed, purebred dog, you know they often have a ton of health issues, like allergies, hip dysplasia, breathing problems.
Yeah, pugs, bulldogs, all those.
Exactly. But a mixed breed mutt is often incredibly resilient and healthy. And that's because breeding closely related dogs concentrates and expresses their overlapping genetic defects.
Right, when two relatives mate, their recessive mutations match up and become active.
But if we apply that JPEG analogy to the original humans, the author is saying there were 0 defects to overlap. Their genetic code was completely pristine.
So close intermarriage wouldn't produce any mutations because the mutations literally didn't exist yet to match up.
Exactly. The severe genetic issues we see today are solely the result of accumulating those 4,000 defective genes over thousands of years of copying the file.
And that leads to the text's most aggressive scientific pivot.
Yeah, this part is wild.
Secular science looks at this process of genetic mutation over time and calls it the engine of evolution, right? That's how we improve and adapt.
Right, natural selection acting on mutation.
But this text looks at the exact same genetic mutation and calls it undeniable evidence of devolution.
Devolution.
Yeah. We aren't climbing a ladder of progress. Our genetic code is breaking down. It's mutating further and further away from its original perfect state.
Okay, I can follow the internal logic of the genetics and the atmospheric canopy.
The internal logic holds together.
It does. But look, if you're listening to this and rolling your eyes at the idea of ancient, hyper-intelligent humans living for a millennium, you're probably asking the same physical question I am.
Where's the proof?
Exactly. If they had all this incredible technology and genius, where is the junk? Where are the ancient landfills full of their machines and computers? Does the author explain why we only seem to find giant rocks and not the actual tools they supposedly use?
Well, the text focuses heavily on the megalithic structures that actually did survive. Specifically, those generally dated around 2000 BC by secular historians.
Okay, so the big stone monuments.
Right. The author argues that modern researchers basically scrambled to explain these monuments because they stubbornly assume ancient people had to be primitive.
Right.
But the text highlights underwater cities with massive megalithic construction and polygon stones that fit together perfectly without any mortar.
Yeah, the document lists some incredibly specific technological claims here. Like it mentions Pumapunku in Bolivia.
Pumapunku is a huge focal point for this.
It's fascinating. Massive andesite stones that are intricately cut with these perfect right angles, and they fit together like literal interlocking Legos.
Without any mortar.
Right, no mortar. And the text claims even today's heavy equipment would struggle to replicate that kind of precision.
And it goes further than just stacking rocks, too.
Yeah, it does. The author cites evidence of machine work artifacts. We're talking about claims of high-velocity drills, industrial-quality lathes, and silicon carbide looped wires used for cutting through solid granite.
And that specific detail, the silicon carbide, is crucial to the author's argument.
Why is that? What is silicon carbide?
Silicon carbide is one of the hardest materials on Earth, second only to diamonds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and you don't just find it lying around in a riverbed. It's a synthetic abrasive. It requires high heat and a massive, complex supply chain to actually manufacture.
So you can't just stumble upon it.
Not at all. If you are finding evidence of silicon carbide cutting tools in the ancient world, it implies a level of industrialization that completely shatters the idea of primitive hunter-gatherers.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. According to the text, how does the secular world explain finding evidence of industrial drills and perfectly machined granite? Do they just ignore it?
According to the document, secular evolutionist archaeologists find these complex artifacts, and because they don't fit the established timeline, they use flawed dating methods to assign them ages in the hundreds of thousands of years.
So they just push the dates back to make it fit.
That's the claim. The author also alleges there is a massive coordinated effort to suppress these findings entirely. Yeah, the text specifically accuses institutions like the Smithsonian of actively preventing information regarding highly advanced ancient designs from reaching the public.
Because if humanity was manufacturing synthetic abrasives and machining granite monuments thousands of years ago, the whole narrative that we were just grunting in caves falls apart.
It totally ruins the evolutionary timeline.
But wait, I watch archaeology documentaries. I've seen shows about Pumapunku and these impossible structures.
Sure.
But they usually don't say ancient humans built them. They almost always attribute it to aliens.
Right, the ancient aliens theory. The text actually addresses this directly.
Oh, it does?
Yeah. The author's point is that secularists look at this undeniable ancient genius, and because their evolutionary worldview simply will not allow ancient humans to be that smart, They're basically forced to invent extraterrestrials to explain it away.
It's like they'd rather believe in little green men from space than admit our ancestors were just way smarter than us.
Exactly. And the author takes it a step further, crossing over into the theological realm.
Okay, how so?
Citing the researcher John Keel, the text suggests that modern quote-unquote alien encounters and theories actually perfectly match historical descriptions of demonic activity.
Wait, so the aliens are demons?
In this specific worldview, yes. Attributing ancient human genius to aliens isn't just a silly mistake. It's an active deception orchestrated by a spiritual adversary who wants to obscure the truth of the biblical narrative.
Okay, so if we rule out aliens and we rule out hunter-gatherers, how does the author explain the fact that we find pyramids, advanced sanitation, astronomy-aligned structures, and these megaliths with the exact same architectural signatures all over the globe?
That is the mystery, right?
Yeah, like from Egypt to Mexico to China to Peru. Did everyone just independently invent the pyramid at the exact same time?
For that explanation, the text turns to the 11th chapter of Genesis,
Yeah.
which is the story of the Tower of Babel.
The Tower of Babel.
Okay, yeah. According to the biblical record, post-flood humanity gathered in a single place, the land of Shinar. They had one unified language, and they decided to pool their advanced technology to build a massive city and a tower reaching into heaven.
And the text points out this wasn't just a harmless community-building project, right?
Not at all.
Because God dispersed them and confused their languages, but not because he was, like, intimidated by a tall building. The author frames it as a divine intervention against, quote, unified evil.
Yes, and this feels like a really crucial concept for understanding the author's overall worldview. It is the linchpin of the whole argument.
Right. Ultimate power corrupts, ultimately.
Exactly. The author is providing a theological critique of total global unity. At Babel, you had a single, highly advanced, rebellious civilization with absolutely no barriers to communication.
And the text draws the stark parallel to modern history to illustrate why that kind of unity is so dangerous.
It's a very grounded political observation.
It is. It points out that the freedoms we enjoy today only exist because of geopolitical checks and balances. Like, when a dictator like Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin trying to take over the world, competing nations with their own borders and militaries were able to rise up and stop them.
Because the power was divided.
Exactly. But at Babel, there were no competing nations. There was no border you could flee across as a refugee. There was one world, one people, one language, and one ruler.
And the author argues that because human nature is inherently flawed and sinful, a completely unified world will inevitably choose an evil leader.
It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, and without competing nations to push back, there's nothing to restrain that wickedness. Therefore, God's dispersal at Babel, creating different languages and geographic borders, was actually an act of common grace.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
It was the institution of a global system of checks and balances to prevent unilateral, inescapable tyranny.
And that divine dispersal perfectly explains the archaeological mystery of the pyramids we were just talking about.
How so?
Well, when God scattered the people from Babel, they didn't suddenly get amnesia.
Right.
They didn't forget their advanced engineering, their machine tools, or their astronomy. Each dispersed group took that incredibly advanced technology and their unified religion fully formed to different corners of the globe.
Ah, I see.
That, according to the text, is why you see polygon masonry and pyramids suddenly springing up on completely different continents at roughly the same time. They all came from the same blueprint at Babel.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a fascinating synthesis of biblical theology and alternative archaeology. The Tower of Babel isn't just a Sunday school story about why we speak different languages. It's the epicenter of ancient technological dispersal.
Right. But the author doesn't leave this in the ancient past, do they?
No, not at all. Everything we've discussed so far, the genetics, the technology, the unified evil of Babel, it's actually just the historical framework for the document's most urgent claim about the world you and I live in right now.
And this is where we have to be incredibly careful to just impartially report the author's viewpoint.
Absolutely.
Because the text makes a direct, unflinching comparison between the ancient world just before the biblical flood and modern Western culture. The author firmly believes that the unified evil of Babel is being aggressively reconstructed in our lifetime.
Yes, the text states that modern society is trending rapidly to mirror the days of Noah. And it cites the warnings in the book of Matthew to back this up.
What are the specific parallels the author sees today?
Well, the author maps out several. framing modern globalist institutions as the literal architects of a returning quote-unquote New World Order.
Like which institutions?
The text explicitly names the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank Group, and the United Nations as entities actively pushing for global governance.
So a deliberate return to a single, unified system of control without borders, just like Babel.
Exactly like Babel. But it isn't just political. The text aligns this push for globalism with intense social and moral claims as well.
Right. The author argues that today's population boom mirrors the pre-flood population explosion.
Yes, and it claims that modern society features widespread sexual perversion and enormous spiritual darkness.
It even takes aim at modern science,
It does?
arguing that the push for transhumanism, tampering with genetics, biology, and gender, is exactly like the pre-flood era when, according to the text, humanity began aggressively corrupting their quote-unquote perfect created genetics.
The author is painting a picture of a culture that has actively abandoned its original design, leading to what the text calls inventions of evil and widespread anarchy.
And to really drive home how the author views modern morality, the text provides a highly specific and frankly startling anecdote from 2013.
This part is quite heavy.
It is. The author claims that modern people increasingly worship nature rather than the creator, and the example given is a vigil held in Colorado for an elk that had been shot.
An elk.
Yeah. The text describes people holding hands, weeping, and singing Amazing Grace as a eulogy for this animal. The author then violently contrasts this elk vigil with the claim that on that exact same day, nearly 4,000 children were aborted in the United States.
The document uses this stark contrast to highlight a perceived catastrophic moral inversion in our society.
A complete inversion of values.
Right. And it notes that since 1973, roughly 56 million abortions have occurred in America.
Wow.
The text directly compares this staggering figure to the ancient sacrifices made to the Canaanite deity Moloch, and goes as far as to state that it makes the Holocaust pale in comparison.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I mean, you might be wondering, why spend the time to unpack all of this, especially if some of these claims make you uncomfortable, or if you completely 100% disagree with them?
It's a fair question.
The reason is that understanding this framing is absolutely crucial. This isn't just a fringe thought experiment taking place in a vacuum.
Not at all.
This represents a massive, highly structured segment of the anti-globalist, biblical creationist worldview today. It informs how millions of people vote, how they view scientific mandates, and how they interpret international news.
That is the crucial takeaway here. If you don't understand the days of Noah and the Tower of Babel as literal historical blueprints, you cannot understand this demographic's deep theological suspicion of globalism.
It all ties back to Babel for them.
It does. To synthesize the author's ultimate conclusion, the modern push for global unity is not a utopian dream of world peace. It is a returning curse.
A curse.
Yes. The text concludes that a spiritual adversary is actively moving the world back to the exact conditions of Babel. One world, one government, one religion.
Getting rid of those checks and balances.
Exactly. This system is being prepared for a single ruler, identified in the text as the Antichrist, who will act as a puppet for ultimate unrestrained evil, mirroring the unchecked wickedness that necessitated the flood in the first place.
It is a massive, sweeping, and intense narrative.
It really covers everything from biology to geopolitics.
It does. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today. I mean, we started with the idea of a water vapor canopy acting as a hyperbaric chamber for 800-year lifespans.
Right.
We explored the concept of a genetic load, how a pristine DNA ladder degrades over millennia, leading to the mutations that secular science mistakes for evolution.
The evolution argument.
Exactly. We dug into the mechanics of suppressed archaeology, from Pumapunku's Lego-like stones to the industrial supply chains required for silicon carbide granite drills.
Which is fascinating.
We saw how the Tower of Babel serves as the explanation for global pyramid construction. And finally, we unpacked how the author views modern global institutions like the UN and WHO as the architectural framework for the returning days of Noah.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on how this author views information technology specifically.
Oh, I like where this is going.
The text mentions the explosive advancement of AI, moving from artificial general intelligence to artificial superintelligence, and it notes that tech capability has essentially doubled every year since the 90s.
Right, Moore's Law.
Exactly. But consider this through the lens of the worldview we just explored. In this paradigm, Technology is not driving humanity forward into a bright, undiscovered frontier.
It's not progress.
No. Instead, AI, global networks, and supercomputing are merely the tools allowing humanity to circle backward. They are the digital mortar and bricks being used to perfectly reconstruct the exact same unified, inescapable state of the Tower of Babel that existed millennia ago.
Wow.
So is our supposedly brilliant technological future actually just a terrifying return to our ancient rebellious past?
It really makes you look at that timeline of human progress differently. Maybe that line isn't pointing up after all. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives around you, keep looking closely at the information you consume, and we will catch you next time.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's segment of Alpha and Omega from the Flood to the Future. You too can be a part of that catching away from the judgments coming as recorded in Revelation, Daniel, and other prophetic books of the Bible. And as we part ways, we want to leave you with this truth. The Bible says today is the day of salvation. Jesus urged us in Matthew 4:17 to repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near, which it truly has. To have a change of mind is what repent means, resulting in a change of actions, turning from our old life and turning to following Jesus Christ. It's the ABCs of salvation. Admit that you're a sinner, for we've all sinned, fallen short of God's glory. B, believe. That word believe in the Greek is pisteuo, which means to place your faith, your trust in Him, to follow Him. And then C, confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord. Well, I hope you make that decision today. And in the meantime, we want to thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. God bless.